Okay. So when we talk about malnutrition, it's a spectrum, and this spectrum is from the extreme undernutrition, whereas people don't get access to sufficient nutrients, to a situation of moderate nutrition, mild undernutrition, normal, then excessive, which can be overweight, then very, very excessive, if there's any word like that, obesity. So when we talk about nutrition, is a spectrum, and malnutrition is the ends of the spectrum, which can be undernutrition or overnutrition. It's very important that you take notes that malnutrition is not just undernutrition, it's both undernutrition and overnutrition. According to the World Health Organization, malnutrition is the gravest single threat to the world's public health. So whether you look at it in form of under or over, the combination of all forms of malnutrition, including hidden hunger. Hidden hunger is inadequate consumption of micronutrients. And the micronutrients are vitamins and minerals. So when people don't consume enough vitamins and minerals, they're suffering from a situation called hidden hunger. It's hidden because most people in such a situation are overweight or obese. So their look can be deceptive. They look nourished, but at the same time, they suffer from undernutrition of micronutrients. So that's hidden hunger. So whether the form of malnutrition is under, over, or inadequate under micronutrients, the combination of them all is the most serious threat to public health globally. So the nutrition disorder depends on which nutrient is deficient or overabundant. And this balance is most frequently associated with undernutrition in developing countries. When we talk about malnutrition, the vulnerable groups are pregnant women and lactating mothers, then children, then adolescents. We're all familiar with pregnant women being a vulnerable group. The pregnant women have extra load, extra human being to take care of. At the same time, some of them in this part of the world are overworked. So the amount of nutrients that they consume, energy and nutrients that are consumed, do not match their expenditure. So they expend more energy than consumed. And what would that lead to? Anybody, you want to unmute your microphone and answer? If people expend more energy than what they consume, what's problem would that lead to?
They will likely lose weight.
They will lose weight. So you can imagine a pregnant woman losing weight because of undernutrition. It's going to affect not just the woman, it's going to affect the child. And that's why public health is concerned about pregnant women. The same thing goes with lactating mothers. The process of lactation is energy consuming. So if a lactating mother does not have adequate nutrition, it's a big problem. That's why this group is a vulnerable group. Then children cannot take care of themselves. They cannot fend for themselves. They cannot determine the food they eat by themselves. So first, if the food is not sufficient, children can suffer. They are vulnerable. If it's not available in the house, or if it's available around their house but it's not accessible by these children, it's a problem. The next one is the food use. If the food is available, but the way it's prepared can lead to infection, the children will be vulnerable. If it's prepared by people who don't have sufficient knowledge, about food combination. The children are also vulnerable. You can see that because children cannot help themselves, they're vulnerable in many ways. We move on to adolescents. This group are vulnerable because they require as much energy as adults and they have some peculiarities. So you can imagine if an adolescent needs as much energy as adults and is not being given enough food. Maybe is a family where the father is the alpha and omega, consumes 6 pieces of meat, and the children share one piece. That happens in many African families. That means that adolescent is vulnerable, is not getting as much energy as needed. Whatever energy the adolescent gets or nutrients he or she gets, some peculiarities can also make them vulnerable. This stage, puberty sets in. So the adolescent is growing fast, is developing in different ways, and it can affect the growth. If energy and nutrients are not sufficient, the growth can be stunted. Please note that at this stage of life, 25% of the growth that anyone achieves in life is achieved during the adolescence. This is the stage that is the second most important in life. The stage of life where growth is fastest is the first 1 year of life, then followed by adolescence. This stage of life is very critical for growth. So there's spurt in growth and there is increase in metabolic rate during this period. There's greater deal of physical activity. Adolescents are restless. They find it difficult to just sit still in one place. So as they move around and they're involved in a lot of activities, they need more energy. And if this is not available, it can affect their life. So it makes them vulnerable. Let me say at this point, it might be useful for you in one other lecture, not necessarily this lecture, but it's good to know that growth does not take place every day in children, even though they are growing, but the growth is not every day. So there are specific periods where there is spurt in growth. During that period, if the nutrition is not adequate, then that child or that adolescent becomes more vulnerable and it can lead to other problems. Now let's talk about children. What are the nutritional problems in children? The one that comes to mind readily, which I believe everyone here may even know, is protein energy malnutrition. So protein energy malnutrition, based on what I said earlier, we can look at it in form of protein energy undernutrition, and we can also look at it in terms of overweight and obesity. Some children actually suffer from overweight and obesity. But for the purpose of this lecture, we can just limit this PEM to PEU, protein energy undernutrition, because that's the one that is more common in our environment. But please note that that doesn't mean that some children don't suffer from obesity. So protein energy undernutrition is a major health and nutrition problem in Nigeria, and it occurs in children, especially within the first year of life. So that means that children who are age 1 are more vulnerable to problems like kwashiorkor, marasmus, and if it's not addressed on time, it can lead to other problems. The child can die. If the child doesn't die, and it continues like that, if he's exposed to excess energy in the future, that child will be more vulnerable to non-communicable diseases. So what are the features of kwashiorkor? The baby or the child can have edema, an enlarged liver, apathy, and delayed development. For children that have marasmus, they have a thin body and their growth is stunted. So those are the features. So for the child that has kwashiorkor compared to the one that has marasmus, edema is a very critical feature that distinguishes the two of them. Then the child with kwashiorkor is not very active. That child has apathy. It's not, but the child with marasmus is still active, very hungry. Then micronutrient deficiency is a big problem in children. And the common ones are vitamin A, vitamin D, zinc, and iodine. Iron is also very important. Iron is also very important in children. So deficiency of iron, iodine, zinc, and vitamin A, vitamin D are very important in children. So if a child has vitamin D deficiency, it will lead to rickets. If he has iron deficiency, can lead to iron deficiency anemia. Iodine deficiency can lead to stunting of the brain, cretinism, and zinc deficiency can also cause several other problems. So I think there should be a lecture later on micronutrients. So for children that have kwashiorkor, we need to ask ourselves what exactly is the problem. There's lack of dietary protein, but adequate carbohydrates. So the challenge is that these children are not consuming enough protein, though carbohydrates is adequate. So they don't look thin like the ones that have marasmus. There's fluid retention, which leads to edema. There's muscle wasting. They have cutaneous fats. So if you examine such children, they will look like this. I wish I had added pictures. There's fat, but there's muscle wasting. There's low serum. If you do biochemical analysis, there'll be low serum albumin, which is still an evidence of low protein. Enlarged liver, there will be anemia and impaired immunity. What are the features of marasmus? These children lack both protein, carbohydrates, and even micronutrients. They are very hungry in every way, both obvious and hidden hunger. So it occurs after prolonged deprivation of food. There is no edema, but there is severe muscle wasting with negligible subcutaneous fat. The serum albumin is normal liver, and then there's frequent anemia. So you notice that kwashiorkor is like a protein gap, but the marasmus is a food gap. It's all kinds of food gap. So protein energy malnutrition is due to an inadequate intake of food, both in quantity and quality. So what happens if this occurs? If the child is not having enough food, there can be infections, whether diarrhea, respiratory infection, measles, and there can be worm infestation. I remember the story of a child that died just about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And as I was asking the father, what happened? Because they had nursed an older child successfully to age 2 or 3. And she said the child had just reached 6 months. And because his wife was lactating very well, he told the wife not to worry, to start food at 6 months. You know, when somebody has just been bereaved, you can't talk much. And in my mind, I was like, who are you to be telling your wife that breast milk is enough at 6 months? I mean, by the time they got to the hospital, they just said the child had an infection, respiratory infection. They couldn't explain it. And within a few hours, the child died. So this is very important. As long as food is not adequate, all kinds of infections can show up and it might not even be explainable. But just because the food is not sufficient, the immunity of that child has been compromised. Increased requirement for calories, protein, and other nutrients. Decreased appetite. Decreased absorption. And these are the mechanisms that you can use to explain the link between undernutrition and infection. So when there is infection, there is increased requirements for calories, for protein, for other nutrients. Then infection also leads to decreased appetite. So when there is decreased appetite, the child will not consume as much food as required, and that will lead to undernutrition again. Of course, there will be decreased absorption and utilization because the infection would have affected the digestive tract. So that will also lead to further undernutrition. So you can see that this is a vicious cycle. Of course, all infections and diseases are calorie wasting. Just the mere fact that the temperature is raised is going to waste calorie, going to burn some calorie to maintain that raised temperature. We now want to talk about the causes of malnutrition. What are the causes? What leads to malnutrition? So again, the most important one is undernutrition. Poor maternal health. If the mother is not healthy, it's going to affect the child starting from the womb. So in a situation where the mother is not healthy, it's going to affect the fetus. And when that child is born on a negative note. Nutritional history is linked to the mother's health and nutritional status. Nutritional history during childhood. So if the mother might be healthy, but for whatever reason, if that child did not take breast milk, maybe he was not properly breastfed, just taking the history by saying, madam, did you breastfeed your child? The woman say, yes, 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 yes. Then ask again, how long? And he said, I tried to, I breastfed for 4 months. Then I started giving other things. Then you know that even though she had good intention, but she did not practice exclusive breastfeeding, which is supposed to be up to 6 months. And that can help you to get that cause of undernutrition to be early introduction of complementary feeding. And like the story I gave, it can be, oh, the child likes breast milk a lot. In fact, by age 6 months, she did not take other things. He just continued breastfeeding. So that history also gives you a reason, gives you an eye into a cause of undernutrition. That's late introduction of complementary feeds. Then failure of lactation or use of over-diluted infant formula. So if you take history and the mother says, is the domestic help that makes the infant, that mixes the infant formula and gives the child, or is the grandmother, you know that it's likely. Then you ask for the ratio of water to formula and they cannot tell you any specific thing. And you know that it's likely to be an ignorant person making the meal, and there can be over dilution, which can lead to problems. And if it's the other way around and the infant formula is too thick, the child can also be overfed and lead to overweight and obesity. From age 2, when a child is overfed, especially if the child is on infant formula, you know, the protein in infant formula is much more than the protein in breast milk, because breast milk is designed for human babies and the infant formula is designed for cow babies, and they need more protein. Of course, they are bigger, they need more protein from that cow milk compared to human beings. So if a child is fed on cow milk infant formula and is not properly diluted, is concentrated, it's possible that that child becomes overweight or obese. The challenge will not be infection. The challenge will be overweight or obesity, which is a factor for non-communicable diseases. But for those who are undernourished, their own problem is communicable diseases, infection. Or if you ask somebody and the person says she stopped breastfeeding completely, even before 2 years, even though it's after 6 months, but you know, the gold standard is exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months and continued breastfeeding for 2 years. Somebody will shout at the other end and say, Dr. Latono, 2 years is too long. But that's the recommendation. I'm sorry, I think I need to put off an alarm. Sorry about the break. So if a mother stops breastfeeding at 8 months or 1 year, it's still a risk, because the recommendation is that a child should continue on breast milk for 2 years, and that's the main meal. Whatever is introduced is complementary. That's why we call it complementary feeds. So what is introduced between 6 months and 2 years is not the main meal for that child. It's just complementary. Breast milk is still the main meal, and that's why a premature termination can be a problem. Poverty is another problem. If the family cannot provide adequate food, it can be a cause of malnutrition. Even for those who are below 1 year or after 1 year. Because if the mother is not feeding well and is overworked, is not concentrating, is not feeding the child properly, can be a problem. Then illiteracy and lack of nutrition information. Like I said earlier, it's even possible that the food is available, but somebody may not know how to combine the food appropriately. You can imagine someone has the money to buy food and buy noodles, give a child noodles, spaghetti, fried plantain, and all kinds of nonsense. And they don't know. Many young mothers don't even know. I remember I was showing somebody my book on feeding infant and adolescent, infant, young children and adolescents. Rich or poor, a child can be malnourished. And the person was telling me around maybe 33 or 35-year-old lady, that she gives Indomie and she feels she has prepared food for her children until she read that book. So illiteracy is not just that somebody didn't go to school, but the person is nutritionally illiterate. The person may not feed the child well, and it can lead to undernutrition. But for large family size, is very straightforward. So if a family has 5 children and the same amount of money to the family that has 2 children, the one with 2 children will definitely be able to fare better. Then poor environmental conditions. People that live in houses where there's poor water supply, drainage, sewage disposal is poor, and they cook beside the toilet. There can be a contamination of food, and if the food is contaminated, eventually it will affect the growth of the child. Do you know that even in situations where there is no infection, no outright infection, children that are exposed to a lot of microbes in their food do not grow well. They don't grow as well as those who are fed in clean environments. Adverse cultural practices are also very important. In some cultures, they cook wrongly, they discard the cooking water from cereals. You can imagine boiling rice and throwing the water away. Some people will now wash the rice as if they are washing clothes. Or cook yam and discard the water. All those methods of cooking that throw away nutrients is not good. And then there are some cultures like Yoruba people that always give water to babies who are on exclusive breastfeeding. So that practice is called predominant breastfeeding, but it destroys the concept of exclusive breastfeeding for those children because they're supposed to be without water. They shouldn't take water or any other thing until after 6 months. But many Yoruba people, they will not give food, but they will give water. So that cultural practice is harmful. And of course, I've explained delayed or inadequate complementary feeding. So it can be, too early, it can be too early, it can be delayed, or it can be inadequate. If a child is 6 months and the mother wants to introduce family foods and begins to give food with a lot of pepper, that child will not tolerate it, or gives food with sugar and other things that adults indulge in that are not healthy, that is inadequate complementary feeding. So ideally, complementary feeding should be to be soft, be able to stay on the spoon, thick enough to stay on the spoon, but not harsh, not hard, like the food that adults eat. And it should be given whenever the child demands for it. That's adequate complementary. There are many other things that you need to learn about complementary feeding. You can get them from those books because the scheduled lectures can never cover everything. Some of these things is the program, master's program assumes that you have learned some of these things in undergraduate days. So the transition from exclusive breastfeeding to family foods is what we call complementary feeding. And this period is from 6 to 18 to 24 months. Yeah, we used to say 18 to 24 months, but around we say 24 months outrightly. This period is very, very vulnerable. I just gave you an example of someone dear to me whose child died a few weeks ago just because of inadequate complementary feeding. This period was not well managed. So it's very important, very vulnerable period. The feeds should be timely. Timely means must be introduced at 6 months, exactly 6 months. It must be adequate. Adequacy in this situation means that the food is parallel, at least to breast milk. The amount of protein is close to what is available in breast milk. Is prepared and given in a safe manner, no infection. Is given in a way that is appropriate and sufficient quantity. So to be able to achieve that sufficient quantity, one has to follow the child's cue. Whatever cue the child gives, the child should not be force-fed, and the child should be responded to whenever the child wants to eat. It depends on the availability of a variety of foods in the household, but more importantly is the feeding practice of the caregiver. So that's why the caregiver must have knowledge and must be ready to adapt to the child, to follow the cue of the child. It's wrong to say a 16-month-old child should feed every 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever. No, the child should be fed based on the cue that the child gives. When the child is hungry, the child can cry or give any other cue. The caregivers must follow that cue. And it's good to say that locally available foods are important at this stage. First, the taste that the child develops at this stage of life is very important, because whatever taste is developed, the child will continue with it for life. That's why we must not allow the child to feed on artificial milk, artificial cereal, processed cereals. We should try to give locally available food so that that child will be used to the natural taste of the locally available foods and continue eating whole foods till adult life. The other challenge is that these processed foods have a lot of sugar, salt, high fructose syrup, other chemicals that can hinder the child's growth or affect the child in the future. So it's important. Another point on locally available foods is that they are cheaper to obtain. They are cheaper to obtain. Another point is that they adapt to the system of the children in that environment and is safer. So you have less cases of allergy, less cases of allergy and other problems that come from strange foods. So how do you know if a child has protein energy malnutrition or protein energy undernutrition specifically now? The first indicator you will know from the weight. That's why every visit to the hospital, children must be weighed and their heights are measured so that they can be growth monitoring. So you measure the weight, you chart it on the growth chart. We call it growth monitoring chart, or we call it road to health charts. These charts are usually kept with the mothers. They take it home and come with it anytime they come to the clinic. So if you noticed from that chart, you know, when you chart indices and you join the plots, it's going to form a curve. It's going to form a curve. The curve will let you know if that child is within the range that is expected for his age, because there are standards. So if you compare the growth velocity of that child to the standard, you look at the weight pattern at a glance, you would know if the standard, if it's within the acceptable range of the standard. If it's below the 5th percentile, then that child is underweight. If it's above the 95th percentile, the child is overweight. So those things are very important, but you need to see such a chart. Just, you can Google it, WHO charts, growth monitoring chart, and familiarize yourself with it so that you look at the lowest curve, that's the 5th percentile, and the highest curve, that's the 95th percentile. So we expect that when a child comes to our clinic, we measure the weight, we chart that weight against the age. Over time, it forms a curve. That curve should be between the 5th and the 95th percentile. Another method we can use is the arm circumference. but this cannot be used below 1 year. So between 1 year and 3 years, we can measure the upper arm circumference. So if you measure the upper arm circumference, there are methods of measuring it. I don't want to bother you with the details. If you follow the correct method of measuring the mid upper arm circumference, it's supposed to be mid upper arm. This is my upper arm. So I take a measurement from this place to the olecranon process and find the middle point. The middle point is where the tape will go. And if I use a standard one, which is called shaker strip, the shaker strip will be placed in that on that midpoint. I would have marked the midpoint. It's not something that you estimate with your eyes. You need to mark the midpoints and put the shaker strip there. Then measure the circumference. Very simple. So if it exceeds 13.5 centimeter, it means that the child is doing well. If it's between 12.5 and 13.5, there's mild to moderate malnutrition. That's under now, mild to moderate undernutrition. And if it's less than 12.5, it's severe undernutrition. So we've talked about children. We want to go to adolescents now. Why are we concerned? I've told you earlier, they form 1/4 of our population. That's 25% of the populace, so we should be concerned. Many health challenges that occur later in life can be prevented at this stage if attention is paid to adolescents. Because 25% of growth occurs at this stage. The total growth that occurs in life, 25% of it is at this stage. If it's not well monitored, they can still be stunting. A child can still be stunted because there's nutritional problem in adolescents. They need a lot of calcium, as much as 1,300 milligrams per day. If they don't get enough, the growth of the bone can be stunted, and that means that child's height is affected for life. Anemia is one of the key nutritional problems in adolescent girls. So just like iron is to girls, zinc is to men or young men or male. Yeah. So zinc is important for the reproductive system of the male, the boys, while iron is very important for the girls. We all know that girls menstruate and they lose a lot of iron every month. So it's very important that they replace the iron in the blood. During this period, the adolescents can also indulge in pastries and other processed foods. They may not settle down to eat proper meals, and that can lead to overweight and obesity. Some of them, because they don't understand the correct way to manage their weight, they don't like the idea of being overweight. So though they consume foods and indulge in a lifestyle that would make them stay overweight, because they don't like it, they indulge in practices that can lead to disordered eating. And if the disordered eating is not addressed on time, it can lead to eating disorders. So just from that sentence, you should know that there's a difference between disordered eating and eating disorders. So the common eating disorders are anorexia nervosa, bulimia. So there are many, but just limit yourself to those two. So if somebody now indulges in practices that involve symptoms close to anorexia nervosa, for example, but the person does not meet all the criteria for that specific diagnosis. So if somebody is not meeting the criteria for specific diagnosis of one eating disorder, then we can say the person has disordered eating. We know there's a problem, but the person is not meeting the criteria for the diagnosis, then we call it disordered eating. They can also have folate deficiency and vitamin A, zinc, and calcium deficiency. So if this undernutrition is not addressed in adolescents, what happens? There will be poor growth, which can lead to stunting, lower immunity. They can be falling ill, diet-related chronic diseases, permanent impairment of mental growth of those who survive. So they can have impairment of mental growth, and some of them can die. So what do we do to prevent undernutrition? You know that even though malnutrition is both under and over, I keep emphasizing that in this part of the world, we're more concerned about the undernutrition. So if you look at these strategies, you can use them to explain overnutrition. For the purpose of this class, I will explain how these methods can help us to prevent undernutrition. So let's start with health promotion. So measures directed to pregnant and lactating women to prevent undernutrition will fall under health promotion. And promotion is whatever strategy we put up that is like a stone that kills several birds. That is health promotion. So if I pick a pregnant woman and give health education, help the woman to know how to eat properly, how to nurse the children based on knowledge, and if possible, also give supplements, you know that that's going to prevent more than one problem. Just that health education can prevent both undernutrition, overnutrition, iron deficiency, zinc. Different challenges can be addressed by health education. So that's one stone kills several birds. If we distribute supplement, maybe iron supplements to children or women, and they're not anemic, that can also solve many problems at the same time. Promotion of breastfeeding is also another stone that kills several birds. If a child is well breastfed, you can prevent mortality, morbidity, you can prevent stunted growth, you can prevent poor cognition. So breastfeeding is one solution that fits several problems. And of course, development of low-cost complementary foods. So if by age 6 months, the mother is able to introduce some complementary foods that will not be laborious and not too expensive, it can also solve a lot of problems. Nutrition education, I've explained that. Measures to improve family diet generally. Of course, home economics. Some people don't know how to manage funds. So even if what is available is enough, but they squander it, they don't know how to manage it, it can cause problems. Family planning and spacing of births, family environment. I've explained some of these things earlier. It's just for you to apply them. So now we go on to specific protection. So the 5 levels of prevention in public health, you should master them. For you to have masters in public health, you must master the levels of prevention. So always remember, it starts with health promotion, specific protection. So let me repeat it. Health promotion deals with the strategies that addresses many challenges at the same time. But specific protection is specific. So that means what you're doing is addressing one specific problem. The child's diet must contain protein and energy-rich foods. That's protecting the child against infection. Then if you give him vaccines, that child is immunized, that will be specific. So it's either a vaccine for TB, BCG to prevent tuberculosis, or a vaccine that prevents measles, or a vaccine that prevents diphtheria, that's specific protection. Then food fortification is a situation where you get a staple food and add a micronutrient. They're adding a micronutrient to a staple food. So that's specific. So if the micronutrient I'm adding is zinc, I'm dealing with zinc problem. Inadequate consumption of zinc in that community. Or if what I'm adding to the food is iodine, like iodine added to salt, the problem that is being prevented is iodine deficiency. That's specific. So explaining food fortification further, we need to fortify our local foods. So for example, many children in Nigeria have access to carbohydrate, but little access to protein and micronutrients. So when we think of what to do, the first thing is not to buy novel foods and expensive things from abroad, but to look at how we can fortify our locally available foods. And then remember that people are adapted to their environment. So these foods are adapted to each tribe and situation. So in urban area, for example, you can grind millet with granules and fish. You can even add a little milk. So the base is millet, and millet has some protein, but it's not enough to give a child only millet. So that groundnut will provide a lot of protein as well as essential fatty acids. Then the yellow maize also has carotenoids, that's micronutrients, some protein, but more protein from fish. And the milk will have a lot of micronutrients. So that effort to add these granules, fish, and milk is what we are calling fortification. So if you grind it together and it's like in powder form, because it's now rich in protein and micronutrients, you can also add to any food. It may not be millet. You can add it to rice, mashed rice, and mix it with this. Anyway, the child doesn't even know what you are giving, so it doesn't really matter. Just ensure that the food is fortified with protein and micronutrients. Palm oil is very rich in vitamin A, so this can also be used for fortification. There's no reason why any child from this part of the world should lack vitamin A because it's abundant in palm oil. The Westerners can be fortifying their groundnut oil with vitamin A, but we don't have any business with that. So that's why we must explore what we have before we start thinking of some hyperfalutin ideas. Wow. So the next level, apart from health promotions, specific protection, the next level is early diagnosis and treatment. So if you're a doctor on the line, you should be familiar with all this. Periodic, so we're talking about we've not been able to, or we have been able to put up some strategies that are like one stone that kills several birds. We have also put up some strategies that are specific like immunization and fortification. But then there are some people that will still escape these measures and will have the problem. So what happens at that level is we want to quickly detect the problem and treat. That's what we call early diagnosis and treatment. So for us to quickly detect the problem, there must be periodic surveillance, early diagnosis of any lag in growth in the child, early diagnosis and treatment of infection and diarrhea, development of program for early rehydration of children with diarrhea. So if a child has already developed diarrhea, we're not talking about health promotion at that level or specific protection. The diarrhea is already here. So how do we quickly deal with it? There must be a method of surveillance for us to pick it on time and deal with it. Development of supplementary feeding programs during epidemics. So if there's an epidemic somewhere and you have made the diagnosis, you have confirmed the population affected, and you find out that there are children, of course, maybe you pull them to one side, you want to now give them supplementary feeding. Please note the difference between supplementary feeding and complementary feeding. And always remember that at age 6 months, what a child needs is complementary feeding. You are complementing the breast milk. But in a situation maybe like a refugee camp, there's epidemic, there's chaos, everybody's confused. We know that children are vulnerable. So what we're giving at that stage is supplementary feeding. The parents might be confused or in distress and they're not able to feed the children well. So we give supplementary feeding. And that's what happens in schools, where you see government also sometimes give supplementary feeding. But many times what they do is food supplementation. So that supplementary that's a supplementary feeding. We are calling it, is the same thing, food supplementation. So you need to understand that you are supplementing what the family gives. Early diagnosis and treatment can also involve deworming of children. So in areas where there's worm infestation, the children are dewormed. Then we have treated. What is the next thing is rehabilitation. So, for example, children that have severe undernutrition, they may even be they may be hospitalized. Then you have to treat them appropriately. Sometimes you give fluids, you give special packaged foods. After that, what happens? Don't just send them to their houses and forget it. There has to be rehabilitation. It's called nutritional rehabilitation services. So there's the hospital treatment, but there must be follow-up care. So we have to visit their homes, look at their environment. Sometimes some of these people might even be relocated away from their environment for the sake of that child. And then follow-up care for that child has to be followed up for your efforts in saving the child to count. This is longer. So improving the nutrition of adolescent girls and pregnant women. What do we do? Very straightforward. All the things that cause the problem, we should avoid it. If it's inadequate food, then improve access to nutritious food. Encourage healthy diets. Choose a diet that provides enough calcium and iron to meet the growing body's requirements. Usually, these adolescent girls. Because if an adolescent girl gets pregnant, it's a big problem. She's still growing and then she now has another human being to care for. So we don't want that to happen. And micronutrient supplementation, prevention of infection. You must do everything to postpone the first pregnancy. Let it not be during the adolescence. Because no matter how well we try to feed that adolescence, it will be a problem. Postpone the first pregnancy till after age 21 or 22. Let there be access to family planning and reproductive health services. Improving the norms and practices related to reproductive health, especially HIV and high-risk sexual activities. Education through schools, religious organizations, markets, and workplaces. Education. Nutrition-related knowledge is what we are more concerned about. It's not about women getting a lot of degrees. but having basic knowledge, being able to read and write, and having a quest for knowledge and especially related to health. That's what is important. So we might have to do research to identify cultural and institutional constraints and detrimental attitudes and practices. Health promotion programs based on research findings, tradition affects the indices, the anthropometric indices of children. So that's why it's important to pay attention to some of these traditions. If the mother-in-law comes and says, somebody should not eat this person should not eat that, and the young mother doesn't have a say, those are issues that have to be looked into. Prevention and treatment of infections and deficiencies that undermine health and nutrition status. So all these, you just need to learn them and understand, know how to explain them in relation to adolescent girls and pregnant women. It's important to improve the number of women that receive quality prenatal and postpartum services. Yeah, we know that pregnant women are given iron supplements, their weights are monitored, their needs are assessed for antimalarials, hookworm medication, micronutrient supplementation, vitamin A in endemic deficiency area, most especially within the first 6 weeks. What is important to encourage these women to partake of this measure, because sometimes the measures are in place and they're ignorant and they're not allowing themselves to be served. You see some pregnant women just collect iron tablets and dump it somewhere. So it's very important that they are well educated on all these measures. So to cap the lecture, we can look at 6 P's of addressing undernutrition in the nation as a whole. So if we address it in the whole nation, it will be very useful for each stage of life, whether infant, children, adolescents, or pregnant women. So the first P is production. Very straightforward. Let's produce more food, because we already know that during the season that food is less, that's planting season. Undernutrition increases, but during the harvest, the rate of undernutrition will drop. Preservation is very important because in this part of the world, there's poor power supply, so the food is not preserved. We need to address preservation. We need to address the problem of power. So I'm speaking to all of you powerful people, so that when you get there as Minister of Health, remember this lecture. We need to address poverty. That's why anybody in health needs to really collaborate with other sectors, because the health sector alone cannot solve the problem of health. Other sectors very important. That's why we talk about intersectoral collaboration. If the economic sector does not solve the problem of the economic situation, the health situation too will not be resolved. Of course, we need to pay attention to population. Family planning is very important. The rate of contraceptive use is still very low, and many people still have large families. Honestly, I don't know how they cope. I can't imagine having more than 2 children. It will affect the standard of life that one plans to live. So we need to address population. Of course, politics is very important, because many things are affected by policies and political decisions. For example, if grants are available for cash crops rather than food crops, more people would prefer to plant cash crops, and we have less food. Importers will not allow policies that will favor local production. So attention has to be paid to policy, because many people that are in position to make these policies, they don't understand the link between what they do and health. So they need people like us to inform them or educate them. Then, of course, the last P is pathology, and that refers to infection. So whatever can be done to reduce the rate of infection will actually improve undernutrition. And that brings us to the end of the lecture. Malnutrition is a significant problem amongst children, adolescents, pregnant and lactating women because these people are very vulnerable. They don't have as much power over their food as adults in the reproductive age, or do we call it working age? They don't have so much power. And at the same time, the children and adolescents are growing. They need more calories and nutrients. So that makes them more vulnerable. While the fetus in the pregnant woman and the dependent child for lactating women also need a lot of attention and are vulnerable. So malnutrition in childhood contributes to the state of health later in life and can predispose the child to, if there is malnutrition in the mother, it can also predispose the child to malnutrition. So we need to address it. Remember the 6 P's at all levels, whether individual, community, or national level. Thank you. Do you have any question? Questions? Question? Okay. No questions. So I'll send the slides to you.
All right, that's fine.
Okay. Thank
Hello,
you.
Ma.
Yes.
Good evening, Ma.
Good evening.
Yes, Ma, I have a question. I'm not sure whether this really counts, but then you talked about specific protection, and you said specific protection addresses one specific problem. For example, you gave the BCG vaccine, which addresses tuberculosis and so on and so forth. And then you talked about food fortification by adding a micronutrient to a staple food. But I was wondering that in the case where you decide to add multivitamins, where you have micronutrients, but a whole combination of micronutrients, you have iron, you have zinc, you have selenium, and all of that in one single mixture, is that also specific protection, or is that a little broader?
Well, it's obvious that if you are adding several things like that, it's not just one thing you are addressing, but it's specific in that you are dealing with micronutrient deficiency.
Okay.
Unlike if you encourage breastfeeding, that breastfeeding will address macro, micro, address growth, address many things. So it's from that sense, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ma.
You're welcome. Okay, if you don't have any other question, we can call it a day. And who is taking you on Friday?
Dr. What's her name? Oluwale.
Okay. Okay. I suppose I've taken you 3 lectures now. Am I right?
Yes, ma.
I've taken 3, right? So that means
yes, you have.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. That means I have 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 more. So we still need to get extra time for me to cover the ones that I have taken. I mean, the ones that are outstanding.
Yes, ma'am. We'll arrange it.
Okay. Have a nice evening.
And you too, ma. Thank you very much, ma.
Bye.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.